talk from here, and then directly when you're done, I'm gonna like sit over there and introduce you to the panel. So it's probably just good that you go straight from here and sit down. I mean, this is very easy going.
Just point out a chair.
Yeah, they're gonna show you.
So we have to choose like portable mics. All of us.
Yeah, so it's basically because it's streamed, and then they just for the panel we just use this one as well. So they're just all the technical stuff here is really good. Yeah, so then you just so like for your talk, you know, I'll be here and I'll introduce you to here, and then you can use this for the slides.
Yes, excellent.
And then when you're done, you'll just go and sit down again. I'll come up, introduce Rasmus, and then after that we will sit. I'm trying to be as organized as I can.
Excellent. It all sounds very good.
But then for the
it's fine.
For the panel, it's
but it's more or less Q&A in the panel because
yes.
I mean it's not really worth repeating all the kind of introductory remarks there.
No.
What's from my part?
No. I think, as I said, what I'll probably
panel is kind of nice if you have really good questions.
Yes, I think this
makes sense. Otherwise, it's
yeah. So basically, what I'm going to do also when you are talking, just to make some notes about and yeah. Ja. Okay. Okay. Já. Ekki. Já. Það ekki alveg. Já, en ég meina, þú veist, maður ekki eins og maður sé eitthvað að þamba vatn, sko.
Nei, ég hugsa að þetta var nóg fyrst í þessu.
Já.
Þetta sé að fara eitthvað línuna.
En getið þið verið búin að hella í þetta rétt áður en að við setjumst? Eða þú veist, já.
Svona smá moment í streyminu.
Já.
Ég ætla að gera síðasta.
1, 2, 3, svo vantar glas á endan hana fyrir mig.
Já, það rétt hana.
Já, djók. Já.
Svo að gera síðasta rassinu.
Annars get ég líka bara eitthvað að djóka í byrjun eða bara þú veist. byrja með merki. Á ég að gefa ykkur merki? Þögn á salinn hérna. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many of you here today, and welcome to this important event hosted in relation to Nordic Day 2025, where the theme is societal resilience and preparedness, a big theme. The event here today is organized by the Nordic Council of Ministers in collaboration with the Nordic Association of Iceland. In Iceland. And my name is Jón Gunnar Ólafsson, and I'm an assistant professor at the Faculty of Political Science at the University of Iceland, and I will be moderating the event here today. Now, the theme echoes the priorities of Finland and Åland's presidency program for the Nordic Council of Ministers in 2025, where the focus is on emphasizing how civil preparedness, trust, and resilience are critical priorities for the region's future. And in relation to this, part of the Nordic Council of Ministers' political priorities for the period 2025 to 2030 concern integrated contingency planning. Now, a little bit about Nordic Day, which is obviously a celebration of the collaborative spirit that unites Finland, Iceland, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, as well as the Faroe Islands, Greenland, and Åland. This year marks the 63rd anniversary of formalized cooperation under the Helsinki Treaty, more commonly known as the Nordic Constitution. Established in the post-World War II era, the primary aim of Nordic cooperation was to foster security, uphold peace and democracy, and to strengthen cultural ties among the participating countries. On March 23, 1962, leaders from all Nordic nations convened in Helsinki to reaffirm their shared values and explore avenues for future cooperation. And I wanted to mention that last year, the theme of Nordic Day focused on strengthening cooperation for peace and security. And following this, the session of the Nordic Council, which was actually held here in Reykjavik last autumn, passed a proposal to update the Helsinki Treaty, recommending that defense and security policy, as well as climate policy, be included. And also that the Faroe Islands, Greenland, and Åland should have an even greater opportunity to participate in Nordic cooperation on an equal footing with the other Nordic countries. So, back to today's theme. As we all know, we are living in an era marked by geopolitical tensions, to put it mildly, social instability and environmental challenges, and Nordic societies are facing increasingly complex and hybrid threats. While Iceland has extensive experience in managing natural disasters, as we all know, the question remains, how prepared are we to confront multifaceted risks that challenge our collective trust and cooperation? And in times of crisis, can we rely on our Nordic neighbors for support? Today we have two exciting presentations, followed by a panel discussion, and I will introduce our speakers later when they take to the podium. But I will now give the floor to Jóhanna Bryndís Bjarnadóttir, She's the Director for Nordic Cooperation at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. She's going to deliver the opening words on behalf of the Finnish and Åland presidency in the Nordic Council of Ministers in 2025. So Jóhanna Bryndís, the floor is yours.
Mr. Moderator, distinguished speakers, dear guests, happy Nordic Day. It is my pleasure to jump in here today to speak on behalf of the Finnish and Ålandic co-presidency in the Nordic Council of Ministers in 2025, and warmly welcome you to this event here at the Nordic House in Reykjavik. And I bear you good wishes from Helsinki and Mariehamn. Today we are celebrating the Nordic Day 2025 and will discuss the important and very actual topic, societal resilience and preparedness. Finland and Åland held the presidency in the Nordic Council of Ministers this year, 2025. The presidency program bears the title, A Strong and United Nordic Region, or as said in Swedish, Ett enat och starkt Norden. Today's topic relates very well into the priorities of the presidency, as it pays particular attention to the security of society, including resilience and preparedness for crisis, as well as to children and young people. The presidency program can be found on the homepage of norden.org, and you are, of course, all encouraged to consult it. And it seeks to establish overall and comprehensive preparedness for various crises and hybrid threats. The Nordic Council of Ministers encompasses a large number of administrative sectors, making it well suited to work with civil preparedness and comprehensive security. The Finnish and Ålandic co-presidency wants to help to ensure that the entire Nordic region is as well prepared as it can be for any crisis that may occur. In addition to the priorities, I also want to mention that the Nordic Council of Ministers works on delivering the Nordic Prime Minister's Vision 2030, which was adopted in 2019, to make the Nordic region the most integrated and sustainable region in the world by 2030. Recently have been published the cooperation programs of the various ministerial councils for the next 5 years, for 2025 to 2030, and they will deliver on the Vision 2030. And the 3 strategic priorities remain of a green, competitive and socially sustainable Nordic region. And these are the most important guidelines for Nordic cooperation. On behalf of the Finnish and Ålandic presidency, I wish us good and inspiring discussions here today. At the same time, I hope the event can shed a light on the importance of this topic and the ongoing good cooperation and work between the Nordic countries in this field. Kiitos. Tack så mycket. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jóhanna Bryndís. Now, before we move on to our very interesting presentations, we will first be screening a 3-minute short film that the Nordic Council of Ministers produced in relation to the theme of Nordic Day 2025. So I hope we're ready with that. So I'll just say enjoy the film.
I Norden står vi sammen om fælles værdier, såsom demokrati, tillid og retsstatsprincipper. Og det gør, at vi er meget modstandsdygtige og beredte, når der kommer kriser.
Poliisi toimii ensivasteen viranomaisena yhteiskunnassa ja esitutkinnassa, tosiasioiden selvittämisessä ja sen selvittämisessä, mitä todella tapahtuu. Pohjoismainen yhteistyö on avainasemassa, myös vedenalaisen infrastruktuurin osalta. Jotta säilytämme resilienssimme Pohjoismaissa,
må vi hjælpe og støtte hinanden hver dag, for vi oplever flere og mere sofistikerede angreb på vores IT-infrastruktur, som kan ramme tog, fly og nyhedsstrøm.
Men det er vigtigt, at vi tager et personligt ansvar, og at vi arbejder sammen i hele Norden.
Jag vet att jag har det som krävs för att klara en krissituation, och det gör mig trygg. Om jag klarar mig själv så blir jag också en del av det större krishanteringssystemet. Beredskapen utgår från oss själva. Som individer måste vi också vara redo.
Så det viktigste er at du har mat, vann, varme og en radio som ikke behøver strøm. Da tar du vare på deg selv og dine nærmeste i en krise, og du hjelper myndighetene slik at vi kan ta vare på dem som ikke klarer seg selv. Og så må vi ha stor beredskap i tillegg til legeberedskapen. Vi må for eksempel ha tilfluktsrom.
Og mange af vores fælles historie begynder lige der, hvor vi bor.
Sermersuaq aakiartungitsoq uangutsinut kinguyaayusunut kissaatigeeneraluaqaaq silaannaammi аллангориарторнера аннеэртумик илунгерсурнартуугоq tamannalu akiorniarlugu suleqataavunga.
Och det är till mikils att vinna att takmarka hlýnun. Það sjáum við hér á Sólheimajökli á suðurströnd Íslands. Vísindamenn á öllum Norðurlöndunum vinna ötullega að því að afla gagna og setja fram staðreyndir sem skapa vissu ástandið. Og það styður ákvarðanir sem verða hluti af lausninni.
Vores verden er udfordret af flere transformative kriser, som påvirker os alle sammen. Og den ændrede geopolitiske situation, den understreger vigtigheden af, at vi i højere grad tager vare på vores levende demokratier. Det kræver et grænseoverskridende samarbejde i alle dele af samfundet. Sammen skal vi sikre, at vores samfund kan håndtere komplekse opgaver og trusler. Som naboer er vi afhængige af hinanden, og vi har brug for at være både integreret og koordineret. For vi er stærkest i Norden, når vi arbejder sammen.
Right. This sort of frames the topic of today very nicely. So now on to our first keynote speaker, Mr. Janne Kankanen. Hope I'm not terrible at the pronunciation. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the National Emergency Supply Agency of Finland. In addition to long leadership experience, Kankanen has experience in various demanding special government projects in the field of industrial policy as well as EU affairs. And before his current position, Kankanen has served in several positions at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment. He holds a master's degree in economics from the University of Helsinki. Now, in his talk today, Kankanen will focus on preparedness and security of supply in the service of comprehensive security. So, Janne, the floor is yours.
So, very good morning from my part as well. It is an honor to be in Reykjavik in Iceland. Very exciting. I just realized how far geographically we actually are from each other, but mentally and culture-wise we are not that far. And I think the film indeed very well frames and demonstrates some of the shared bases for our cultures in the Nordic countries. Happy to be here. I was told I have 15 minutes time, and I'm really struggling to condense all of this topic into 15 minutes, but I'm doing my best, and of course, happily and luckily, there's this Q&A afterwards. Oops. No, just a second. Right. I'm going to touch upon these topics more or less within this timeline, talking about what we actually mean by preparedness. It's a very topical, even fashionable word nowadays, so maybe just a few ideas on how we can approach the terminology and what we mean by preparedness. Our approach in Finland is very closely linked to comprehensive security concept. We are part of comprehensive security. Although we are a civilian organization, we are not the kind of traditional security people, but we are in any case very closely embedded with the security in Finland. And indeed, as it's been said in the introductory remarks, we are indeed living through an age of uncertainty, unpredictability. Geopolitical tensions indeed is something that you can put it mildly like that, but it's something which is very historic. And there are a lot of twists and turns, obviously, in the media, but I think there's an underlying sort of a change, underlying kind of structural changes that can bring about a very different world within a few years than what we have used to be seen following the kind of Second World War, world order. So something about Finnish experience, the model, and then a topical issue around critical infrastructure and the role of private sector. And then finally, as I see, there's a huge potential for the Nordic countries to develop common approaches, common solutions, and to kind of enhance and improve our resilience and preparedness. And I think we should sort of seize those opportunities. Right. A few words about us. We are a fairly small organization within the central government in Finland. Although our name suggests that we deal with the emergency supplies, we actually deal with more societal preparedness, societal crisis in view of various types of crises. We are not first responders, we are not rescue service, but our sort of strengths basically come from two principal avenues through which we work on resilience. One is the strategic stockpiles. There's a sort of an extensive, traditionally an extensive system of strategic stockpiles in Finland with the purpose of ensuring that there's availability of critical materials in all types of crisis and disruption situations. And then we have another, let's say, cornerstone of our activity, which is about the cooperation that we do with the private sector. It's a very extensive cooperation platform, a kind of a continuous dialogue that we have with the private sector. And why? Obviously because private sector is responsible for most of the critical infrastructure provision, services, production, that comes from the private companies. So we cannot leave out private companies when we talk, and if we want to talk about security in a serious way. Altogether, we have 1,500 organizations, mainly private companies operating in altogether 7 different critical sectors in 27 different sort of subsectors and industry branches, with which we have a very close relationship in different ways. We also operate through what is called an emergency supply fund, 100% government-owned fund, part of the government, not part of the annual state budget, giving us a bit of a leeway in terms of long-term planning, as well as capability for reacting quickly if need be. For instance, living through the pandemics, we remember the PPEs, the masks and all that. We were at that time mandated to procure nationally a huge amount of PPEs by our organization, using our capabilities for procurement, but also the kind of a financial financial assets or the financial basis. We finance ourselves through a tax-like levy called a strategic stockpile fee. We don't aim at doing turnover, but it's recorded because we do certain things in the market, for instance, in the oil products, selling and buying within 1 year. The value of the balance sheet of the fund actually demonstrates more or less the amount of stockpiled material that we own ourselves. That's oil, grain, seed, different types of critical material for industry in Finland, a whole variety of material that we hold in our stocks. So, comprehensive security. I think the kind of a main takeaway from comprehensive security concept is that security is not only a business of the traditional security organizations. They are necessary and they are very, very important, but that's not the whole story. Security can and should be approached through different angles, through different perspectives, and all of the points mentioned here in the diamond are part of the security, national security. Our remit or the mandate most closely relates to economy, infrastructure, and security of supply. Maybe time permitting, one word about the terminology. Security of supply, English terminology normally refers more or less only to the availability of material. But that is not the whole story when we talk about resilience and preparedness. And that's why we tend to talk about security of supply and resilience in one sentence or in one concept. Or then we talk about national preparedness. Because what we want to achieve is that in all circumstances, the critical functions of the society, food, water, logistics, digital infrastructure, energy, that those critical functions can continue to perform in a satisfactory level in all kinds of situations. So it's the continuity of those services which is really critical. And also from that perspective, the role of the private sector, the private industry is so important. So it's much more than simply materials. It's about availability of labor, it's personnel, it's availability of logistics. It's all of those things, in fact, that are important from the critical infrastructure company or one particular location. If you have a critical industrial complex or something else which is critical for the society owned by the private sector, you need to think about the upstream and downstream kind of considerations. It's not only about making sure that the critical object is secured physically. It's not enough that there is cybersecurity, which is necessary and important, even critically important, but you need to understand that when trying to safeguard the continuity of that function, you have to think about the other kind of considerations around that as well. And that's what we are trying to do. Well, that actually more or less is a follow-up and continues the earlier explanation. So what constitutes a security of supply, or what constitutes a security of supply problem, or a resilience problem, or a continuity of services problem? We tend to define it in this way, that not everything which is disrupted is our business. It's not security of supply problem. In Swedish it's försörjningsberedskap, but sorry, that's as far as I can talk in Swedish about this, but let's stick to English anyway. But that kind of means that the security of supply concept is not often extremely suitable in explaining this directly. But anyway, so we have disruptions, and we have those everyday disruptions in the market. It can be a production line, it can be a logistics problem that a company faces in its normal operations. Then when it's disrupted, then that can become a disruption in supply. But even that is not something that is a concern from the society or for the coordinated response by the society. It's normally something that should be handled and managed by the continuity management practices, skills, readiness plans putting to effect by the organizations by themselves. And also for that reason, the way in which the private organizations are prepared and how their skills at continuity management, risk management, readiness capabilities, how they are kind of organized is very important in terms of trying to handle the disruptions that can be also, or that can have a kind of societal meaning as well. But then if and when there are kind of multiple disruptions, or if the time passes and the disruption sort of stays serious or is getting more serious, then it can become a disruption of security of supply. And then it's a question of kind of mobilizing societal support, coordinated response. A strategic stockpile can be kind of deployed, or the authorities can kind of start on sort of a complementary support for this and that critical service and so forth. And obviously with those arrangements then that are in place not only by the government but also by the critical companies, when they can be employed, then hopefully we can get back to the kind of a more tolerable levels. And we don't want to go under the minimum required performance, because then we are talking about survival of the population. Then we can be, for instance, talking about a situation where there's a serious disruption in the water distribution system or something like that, and that's not something that we can allow to happen even in case of very serious crisis. So how is it that we want to ensure that these disruptions are kind of handled in an organized way? We follow and try to follow what we call a systemic approach to security of supply and resilience. That means that all of these elements must be in place in order for us to be able to kind of do this in an organized manner, and hopefully contributing to preparedness overall. So you need to have a kind of an understanding all the time of the risks and threats, both short-term and long-term. Short-term is more or less solved in our system by way of asking from the critical operators, from the companies. So we actually use that network of 1,500 companies for data collection. We, at this point in time, when there's no kind of serious problem, at least short-term problem around, we kind of produce a monthly report on the security of supply and resilience in Finland, making use of the 1,500 critical companies and other organizations, collecting data, putting it together, forming an aggregated report. But we also need to have an understanding on the long-term trends and long-term risks and threats. And I have to say this is not an easy task, especially now. Never it is, but especially now, because the fact is that the geopolitics and all that is very, very uncertain, and the kind of predictability is at a very, very low level, to put it mildly, in a way. You also need to have an understanding on the focus areas based on one's understanding on the risks and threats. And at the moment, we have defined 3 particular threat clusters to be most important for Finland and Finland's preparedness for the time being. Those three areas are not probably surprising. They are pretty bleak, I would say, but that's the reality. So it's a military conflict, an unlikely scenario, but still something that we need to get prepared and be prepared as a society. Hybrid warfare, sort of a serious hybrid operations and countering those in advance as much as possible. And the third kind of a big threat cluster is the serious disturbances in the global economy, and that's about the critical supply chains and the disruptions there. Consider, for instance, a problem and a crisis now escalating in the kind of a China-Taiwan context, and the possible impact of that on critical supply chains for whole of Europe, and of course including then Finland, most likely Iceland as well, and other Nordic countries. We've been doing quite a bit of studies on that aspect. Sort of one talks quite a bit about the China dependencies on China and how that kind of impacts the kind of preparedness going forward, at least in the long run, also from the European perspective. Well, it's of course hard to tell, but maybe it will become a time when we need to do a similar assessment vis-a-vis the US in some ways. I'm not going to dwell on that too much, but anyway. We need to do planning, and we have an extensive planning system in place for different contingencies, but concentrating on these three thematic threat clusters. And we also have extended the planning to cover the private sector. So we have 27 subsectors and industries, and all of those now have their own kind of a preparedness plan in place. Implementation in normal times, when there's no crisis, now there's no crisis management mode, there's no state of emergency. Now we are still living, luckily, unfortunately that stays like that. We live through a normal times. Then our implementation work consists of different thematic programs on energy, logistics, digital infrastructure, and food and water, with the idea of trying to enhance the level of preparedness in these thematic areas to kind of match those risks and threats that I just mentioned. Material preparedness, a very big area covering stockpiles, but extending to other areas of activity as well. And then the practical cooperation with industry, a few words about that in a second. And obviously we are more or less spending taxpayers' money, so that's why we also need to have a kind of a constant impact assessment. What is it that we can kind of contribute to the national preparedness? Well, this is our strategy slide. I could talk a very long time about this, but just a few highlights from here. We have been looking at the changes in the security environment. Based on this, we have defined these said three thematic areas. There are other relevant issues for national preparedness. Iceland is very skilled at reacting and responding to natural disasters. One underlying sort of a theme around that, of course, is the climate change. The long-term systemic change is going to bring about many direct but also indirect effects and impacts on security of supply, critical infrastructure, and then the other things that we have been looking into in terms of EU regulation, for instance, and so forth. But what is important is that we have been able to define focus areas during our strategy period. I mentioned more or less those: energy, transport, and supply chains. Finland being especially vulnerable from the perspective of sea logistics. We are very dependent on the smooth operation of the sea logistics in the Baltic Sea. Digital security and security of information, and food and water supply. That cryptic terminology with production arrangements more or less refers to wartime arrangements for civilian preparedness that we are in the process of improving at the present time. Then one example, and then I'm nearly done. I've been referring to material preparedness. We hold fairly extensive strategic stockpiles. We have a lot of contractual relationships with companies, altogether around 200 cooperation partners in Finland, companies with which we have contractual relationship, partnerships through which we actually hold these different types of arrangements, but we are also in the process of improving them, and mainly thanks or due to the fact that we have seen a very protracted conflict, serious warlike situation in Ukraine. Obviously very terrible on its own, and wholeheartedly supporting Ukraine now, but it's also a place from where we can kind of have a lot of lessons learned, to be honest. And one primary lesson to be learned is that it is not enough to react to the first sort of reaction. Is not enough. We need to have an understanding and capabilities developed to also tackle availability of critical materials, as well as ensuring continuity of critical services otherwise through a crisis period, but also covering escalation, which can be 3 to 12 months, and then also possibly a protracted conflict. And the mechanism to be able to do that vary from one time span to another. Even the best possible stockpile can only last for a certain period of time. And it's not possible to have a sort of a stockpile that lasts forever. So that's why we are in the process of kind of renewing and extending our approach on this, making use of other kinds of arrangements, production reservations, also procurement cooperation, market-based production that could kind of come about in a longer crisis, but also international cooperation. And here I have kind of high hopes in terms of developing Nordic cooperation, at least in certain critical areas with which we can kind of respond to this totality of problems in a kind of a coordinated, mutual manner. Just to give you an idea on the magnitude and the structure of our public-private cooperation in relation to national preparedness, 7 sectors as mentioned, and 28 pools, which means committee structures for each of the subsectors or industries mentioned here in the margins. So each of those sectors, like energy, you have heat, gas, heat, liquid fuels, and electricity. Those companies that are active in that industry have their own kind of a cooperation structure, meeting on a regular basis, going through simulations and exercises, which is really important in preparedness. You can have the best possible plans on paper, but if you have not put them into practice through exercising, through simulation, crisis simulation, then they kind of are more or less meaningless and will remain more or less paper tigers. Last but not least, I'm not going to read this word by word, but just to give you an idea on the opportunities, really quite remarkable opportunities as far as I see from working together, because indeed I think Nordic countries share much of the threats. Obviously Finland being at the moment geographically being a frontline country vis-a-vis our eastern neighbor, and we can name them an enemy at the moment. But still, I think we have a lot in common, and I think we could and should work together more. We have a very well-developed cooperation relationship now with Sweden. There's quite a bit of activity around actually establishing a Nordic network of preparedness, which is an excellent idea. I really support that, and we are going to host in Helsinki in May or in early June a fairly major meeting where the kind of responsible people from the government come on the Nordic kind of network of preparedness, and I think it's very much in the spirit of Nordic cooperation and everything what the Nordic Council actually does. So there's a lot of opportunities there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Janne, for an excellent presentation. And as I mentioned, we'll have opportunities for a question and answer session here following the second keynote. So our second speaker is Dr. Rasmus Dahlberg, who is one of the few Danish researchers specializing in resilience and societal security. With a background in disaster history, he wrote his PhD on the concepts of risk and resilience in collaboration with the Danish Emergency Management Agency. And he actually did part of his PhD here in Iceland in relation to Nordic, Nordforsk-funded Center of Excellence on Resilience and Societal Security. So in his talk today, Rasmus will focus on a new total defense, hybrid threats versus societal security. So Rasmus, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And thank you to the organizers for organizing this and for inviting me back home to Iceland. I am an associate professor at the Royal Danish Defence College. Well, not really right now because I'm on sabbatical. For 9 months, I do research on societal security in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. So, and I'm really better suited for the cold weather than the heat. So it was really nice to jump on a plane, fly to the Nordics, go from the flybus directly on the local bus number 8 to Norfolk last night and jump into the ice-cold water to clear my mind. When I'm not on sabbatical, I lead the Center for Societal Security at the Royal Danish Defence College, which is our research center in Denmark for a new concept in the Danish context, societal security. I shall return to that in a few minutes. I also lead a research project, a 3-year research project funded by Nordforsk, which is called ReSector. You know, all good research starts with a fancy acronym. So ReSector is rethinking sectorial responsibility in something blah, blah, blah. So it's about looking at COVID-19 crisis management in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, trying to learn as much as we can about crisis management with special focus on the fundamental principle in the Nordic countries of sector responsibility. What happens to sector responsibility in times of a broad societal crisis? So everything has a history. And as you said, I have a background in disaster history. Back in the 1930s, something happened to the concept of warfare. Back in the so-called good old days, which is before the 1930s, war was primarily something that was carried out by professional armies or navies. 2 armies would go out into a field two navies would sail out into the North Sea, and then the two sides would start shooting at each other, and whoever first ran out of bullets had lost. But something happened in the 1930s, and it's summed up nicely in the title of a book by a German general named Ludendorff, who in 1935 published a book called Der totale Krieg, Total War. And what was new was that the whole society became the target of warfare. The idea was that you could undermine the authority and the support of your opponent's government by attacking the society, by attacking infrastructure, and through those processes turn your opponent's population against the leaders. So when something, and we saw the first example of this with the bombing of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War, and to a very large extent during the Second World War. And from the concept and the idea of total war came the concept of total defense. When you have warfare that is directed towards whole societies, you need to mobilize the entire society in a defensive posture. So the birth of total defense was the Second World War. It really developed in the beginning of the Cold War. And there was never, like, at least in Denmark, an agency called the Agency of Total Defense. It was more like a principle. It was a basic fundamental principle that is about organizing in a way so you synchronize the efforts of military defense, of civil defense, of civil preparedness, and police and health authorities and everything, so you can organize in the best way against the risk and threat from total war. Now, something has happened again, and basically it can be, it's at kind of the high level of abstraction, a similar thing that happened in the 1930s. Now, we're talking about hybrid threats, and in the same way that total war required total defense, hybrid threats require societal security. They are comparable concepts. We often talk about hybrid threats as it is something new, which is really not true. Often we trace the origins of hybrid warfare back to the so-called Gerasimov doctrine, the chairman of the Russian military staff. He gave a presentation back in 2013, and often that is like seen as the birth of the hybrid warfare doctrine. But what he really did in 2013 was to give a description of how he thought the United States had been fighting wars for decades. So nations and states have been doing this for decades, during the Cold War, using a combination of different instruments of power at the same time. So hybrid threats, it's a very broad concept that can be defined in many number of ways, but basically with something when something is hybrid, it means that it consists of different components. These different components and instruments of warfare have become very clear and evident over the last couple of years, especially. And seen from a Danish perspective, something weird just happened in September 2022 when gas bubbles started coming out of the surface in the Baltic Ocean. So, and lately we have seen clear signs of information warfare, spread of mis- and disinformation during the Greenlandic election campaign just a few weeks ago. This example here is a post on social media from Muti Ede, the leader of the Greenlandic self-government. The problem here is just that it's a fake profile spreading fake news in the Greenlandic election campaign. And as you note here, perhaps, it is being retweeted or reposted by Ole Weber, who's a professor of political science in Copenhagen University, the founder of the securitization theory in Copenhagen School. So it can be really, really difficult to spot the difference between what is true and false, which is one of the aims of hybrid warfare. And just to As I said, there are many different ways of defining hybrid warfare and hybrid threats. One model that has been useful, you know, as George Box said in the 80s, all models are per definition wrong, but some of them can be useful, and this is one of them, I think. This is Kilcullen's liminal warfare model, and it defines different kinds of operations and actions in relation to 3 thresholds. So we have something that happens in our societies below detection threshold. These are the things that we do not even notice. Someone goes out and places explosives on a pipeline at the bottom of the ocean, or plants a backdoor in a software, in some kind of critical IT system, but we don't know it. It's just there. It hasn't been detected. It's sleeping there. So we have no idea about this deeply secret clandestine activity below the detection threshold. Then sometimes we do actually detect it. That means that we have managed to go above the detection threshold. That is when gas starts bubbling out of the water in the Baltic Ocean. Now we know something has happened. Probably those 2 pipelines did not blow up on their own. Probably someone had something to do with it. But we have no idea who was behind it. It's difficult for us when we talk about hybrid threats and hybrid warfare to go above the so-called attribution threshold. Attribution is when we are able to pinpoint a perpetrator, someone who's behind it. But the problem is that we have to go even further. In order to go above the response threshold, we have to be able to prove it. This is when, as a member of NATO, for instance, if we evoke the Article 5 of the NATO treaty, we better have pretty solid proof. Otherwise, there will be a difficult conversation in the North Atlantic Council, I guess. So the problem is that we cannot retaliate unless we go above the response threshold. And this means that hybrid warfare, hybrid threats are designed to stay above detection threshold but below response threshold. This is the liminal warfare zone, otherwise also known as the gray zone of hybrid warfare. This is a really, really difficult place for states to navigate. The aim of hybrid warfare is not to conquer territory. It's not to topple governments. It's just to be really, really, really annoying on an everyday basis. So what do we do about it? Yeah, as I said, societal security has not really been high on the agenda in the Danish context. We have not really used the term societal security. We have talked about preparedness, we have talked about, to some extent, supply chain management, but we have lacked an overarching concept to address these issues in the face of hybrid threats. So, being very, very fond of the Nordic cooperation, and especially Nordforsk, you know, apart from a good acronym, all good research also starts with funding, so I'm really, really happy with Nordforsk especially. I reached back a couple of years ago to the Nordforsk 2013 definition of societal security and tried to introduce this in the Danish context as an overarching concept that could help us make sense of what it is that we're trying to do in this new kind of warfare. And also, you mentioned that Finland is is a frontline state, and we used to be a frontline state in the Cold War, and then luckily we expanded NATO towards the east. The problem with hybrid threats and hybrid warfare is that the real front line is not geographically determined, because hybrid warfare thrives in the gray zone between war and peace. It thrives in the shadows of structures of society. It thrives in the overlaps and gaps between societal sectors, in these areas where responsibility is not clear. When we have to figure out who's actually responsible for this, then we are already behind, and it, to a very large extent, thrives in cyberspace that knows no borders. So this is just to give you an example of how we have worked with this in the Danish context over the last couple of years, trying to break down the definition of societal security into something that we can actually work with. And of course, we are very much inspired by Finland. We are very much inspired by Norway and by Sweden. There's like, to be honest, we are lagging behind in Denmark. We are lagging behind, so we are looking towards, first of all, Sweden and Finland for inspiration. And from what I hear is that Sweden and Norway, and Sweden and Norway looks to Finland for inspiration. So one of the upsides of being a bit behind is that there's so much you can learn from your friends. So this is what we're trying to do now. The Cold War seemed to never end for real in Finland. Norway restarted their total defense concept after 2014, the annexation of Crimea. Sweden established a ministry for civil defense in 2022, and we just created our new ministry for societal security and preparedness last year, and it's only a couple of months ago that we had a new authority for societal security in Denmark. Last year we had a fierce discussion in Denmark about should the authorities give out advice to the population about how do you prepare for crisis for 3 days. And that has been a really, really tough discussion. It's only like 13 months ago I was on a TV debate with the Minister of Defense, who was by then responsible for this area, and he still totally rejected the applicability of involving citizens in preparedness. It's only 2 years ago that the Danish Prime Minister said in an interview that she did not have canned food in her basement, and she was not going to buy any. But we have really, really, really changed that over the last year. And we had 72-hour recommendations for crisis preparedness published to the Danish population in June last year. So these are all building blocks meant to strengthen societal cohesion, because this is, at the end of the day, what societal security is about. And we developed at our research center this little model. Now, you had already taken the diamond as the model shape in Finland, so we had to come up with something original. So we tried to, some of you will recognize the civil defense triangle in this model. So this is really not rocket science. It was just a way of explaining what we were talking about to politicians and decision makers and the media. So basically, it's a whole of society approach. It's a whole of society that resembles more or less also the comprehensive security concept with small variations. So what we say is that, of course, the state, the government, has a really, really important responsibility in this, because it's only the state and the government that can strategize. And this is what I'm fighting for right now, is we really need a societal security strategy in Denmark. A real strategy, not just a vision, but a strategy that contains ends, ways, and means. How safe and secure do we want to be? When do we want to be it? How are we going to do it? And who are responsible, so we can see if they actually do the job. This is what I'm dreaming about right now. Then we have the traditional coordination level between civilian and military authorities. And what is new in Denmark is that we have also started talking about the lower part of the model. How to include civil society, how to include volunteer organizations like Red Cross and so forth. We have not been very good at that so far. How to involve private sector. We have done nothing since the end of the Cold War than to privatize everything, especially in critical infrastructure. So it's a totally new dawn now. We have, and what I experience is that private sector is really, really ready and eager to be part of societal security. They just need instructions. They need a level, fair playing field, so it will not interfere with competition and all this. And then at the bottom of the model, at the private level, the citizens. Now we more or less figured that out last year with our 3-day recommendations. And what happened just a few months later? Sweden went up to 7 days in their recommendations, and Norway also went to 7 days. I don't know what we do in Finland. Is that 7 days? Still 3 days. Okay. So compared to Sweden and Norway, now we're behind again. But at least we are in the game. Yeah, so this is kind of the model that we are using in the Danish context to break down this whole of society approach into something low practical and concrete that we can work with. So, so what is it? What should a Danish strategy and what should a Nordic strategy for societal security in the face of hybrid threats build on? Well, I have this idea that we need to weaponize trust. We agree again and again that trust is one of the things that join us together in the Nordics. So we have to figure out for real, and I'm not talking just like vague concepts of it's nice that we have now. We've just had the happiness report that came out again. You won again in Finland, but we're all so happy in the Nordic countries, and we have high levels of trust. We see it. I don't know about the other countries, but in Denmark we have a slight deterioration in general trust in society, but still it's extremely high. How do we weaponize that? In low, and I'm speaking low practical terms here. Because we need to fight the dark forces that threaten the cohesion in our society by using our fundamental values. Fundamental values, that's actually part of the Nordforsk definition of societal security. I always remind people that requires us to figure out what are our fundamental values and how do we weaponize them instead of fighting threats by allowing them to deteriorate. Then we need, of course, also to share knowledge. That is what we're doing here. That was what we did in Stortinget in Oslo on Tuesday. And we have to improve our abilities to do that dramatically. We have a golden opportunity now with Finland and Sweden in NATO also, because you also had on one of your slides that the whole of society approach, one of the aims of this is to support military operations. This is closely linked to host nation support and the military mobility and so forth. So, and NATO, together with the EU, are very, very important players in this field. We see a movement towards ever more close collaboration between NATO and the European Union on strengthening the societal security and cohesion of the respective member countries. And then we should also do our best to export our models, because they actually work quite well. And I'm happy to see that, like with the industry report that came out in October, now that the Finnish model has been like packed and made ready for export to the entire European Union. This will be extremely high on the European Union agenda for the coming decade. And we can play an important, very important role in that in the Nordic countries. So this was what I had prepared for this talk on society, security, and preparedness. And again, thank you for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to participating in the, and you see, I met one of my heroes, the Swedish Minister for Civil Preparedness, and we have agreed that with our bald heads and our big beards, that we are each other's body doubles, which is always very nice in a time of crisis. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask the panelists to please come and sit here. So we have obviously already met Rasmus and Janne and Johanna Bryndís. Yeah, we're this is like a and so I would also like to introduce Dagbjört Hákonardóttir, who's a member of Alþingi for the Social Democratic Alliance, and she's the head of the Icelandic delegation to the Nordic Council. And we also have Hinrika Sandra Ingimundardóttir, and she's a project manager on resilience matters within the Directorate of Defense at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. So, I mean, these presentations, there was so much that we could talk about here, and I had sort of mentioned to the panelists to if they would maybe want to start by commenting a little bit about something that drew their attention or wanted to respond to briefly, but that's maybe a very difficult task. But maybe if I start with you, Dagbjört, is there something in particular you were struck by or would want to sort of focus on to begin with?
Thank you, and just again, thank you to the panelists. What was a pleasant surprise today, I had high hopes for this panel, but sometimes you have a panel, but sometimes you have a very good panel. And I am very excited to take on the notes both from Finland, which has more of a bureaucratic, a very structural, practical, this cohesion you have made is really something that we can present to the Icelandic public, and people will see that this is a project that we need to go into. Icelanders have generally been very good in responding to sudden crisis. In terms of preparedness and long-term vision, we have room for improvement, to say the least. But this is definitely something that I am excited to bring on to the public, and I know that the Nordic model is always something that the Icelandic public wants to listen to. So this is very good. Again, with Rasmus's approach when it comes to hybrid warfare and the importance of just general trust to the public and to each other. This is not talked about enough, because I think that we saw in the COVID-19 crisis that one of the reasons, and I am just going to be a bit political here, because my party was in the opposition during that difficult time. And generally, the Icelandic government did a fairly good job when it comes to tackling the crisis. But that was not the least because of the opposition that said, this is not a political problem, let's do it together. And I mean, some people said, of course, that goes without saying, but in my view, it doesn't.
Yep. So, Henrika, Sandra?
Yes, I would just like to maybe start and echo what Dagbjört has been saying, because I think, yes, we can learn a lot from our Nordic colleagues, and I thought your lectures were quite interesting and informative. And because in Iceland, as we have been saying, we have a good civil protection system. And we are quite good in responding to it. And during maybe the last 5 to 6 years, we have been responding to avalanches, we have been responding to volcanic eruption, we have the COVID-19 pandemic, we have mudslides, we have landslides, we have everything. And we've been quite good in this. But at the same time, maybe we have prepared, but we haven't prepared for everything. So, and for now, in a changing world and a changing, maybe like you said it, and you framed it so good, Jan, I thought. So, but this is something that we have to prepare for. And at the same time, though we are maybe lacking a little bit behind, we have still been doing things. And at the same time, when we have been dealing with this crisis that we have been having, we are at the same time also been taking it into practice and learning from it and taking it into policy. So we haven't done nothing because we have a policy on civil protection. It is from 2021, and based on that, we have been last year's been having a re-evaluation of the legislation of civil protection, and hopefully next autumn we will see that proposed before Parliament. And now at the same time we are also taking into account in the Director of Defence actually in a cooperation project, because in Iceland we are small, but that is also maybe the best thing with us. We can work together quite when we need to work together, and we have different hats, so we see maybe the things from different perspectives. So as for myself, I am a three-hatted person. I work for the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also the National Commissioner of the Icelandic Police. So I'm combined with all these three hats in my position in this resilience matters. So, and our project now is to take the NATO 7 baseline requirements, which is actually, I think we have been looking quite well to the Finnish diamond, and now maybe we can look to the Danish ring that you proposed, because this is something that we are now actually looking into and trying to find our Icelandic way to how we implement this into practice.
And Johanna Bryndís?
Yes, thank you,
and thank you both for the excellent presentations, which I found very inspiring. With regard to Janne's presentation, I thought it is very impressive, this comprehensive approach that Finland has established in this field, and the Finnish diamond, and also including the private companies. And I think it's also impressive, this systematic approach to security of supply and resilience. And also letting the whole of society having a role. And I noted especially what you said, that there were remarkable opportunities for cooperation among the Nordic countries. And you said potential for a powerful Nordic approach. And I hope I'm allowed to quote you on this in my future work. And with Rasmus' presentation, it was very informative, also with a background and giving this overview, and that the total war led to total defense. And I think it also sheds a light to the importance of research and in this field, and the Nordic funding, like the project Resector had. And in this regard, I also wanted to inform that now in December, Nordforsk announced that there were 6 networks receiving funding. Nordforsk granted research networks, 6 research networks funding that will help strengthen resilience and preparedness in the Nordic region. And according to my counting, of those 6, 4 have Icelandic partners. So it's very good that there's active research in this. So, but thank you.
Yeah. Just to pick up on that, because I also noted here opportunities for Nordic cooperation, as Janne was saying, and that was sort of towards the end of your presentation. So I would like to maybe pick up on that and ask you to talk a little bit more about that. I mean, how do you see, like, what do we need to do in the coming years? So where are these opportunities, and maybe what do we need to do here in Iceland to participate in this? Very easy question.
Well, not an easy one, but I think it's something that indeed includes a lot of potential, and I think that's the good starting point. How should I say? I think it's important to understand that different countries kind of approach this understandably from their own kind of heritage and history and practices, and that's clear. And Iceland, for instance, being a first-class sort of an actor in responding to natural disasters, that's in a way understandable and natural, because you are kind of experiencing these more or less regularly or irregularly, but kind of you need to be prepared because you have that circumstance. And I think in the similar way, the total defense, which we more or less actually call comprehensive security, for some reason we don't use that total defense terminology, but more or less it kind of refers to the same things that Rasmus was saying. Finland having its own heritage tradition, being a neighbor to Russia, and having the history of battles and things like that. It's the kind of that type of security, which is kind of a military security, the risk of being invaded. That's always has been in the kind of a backbone, and it's kind of embedded in the Finnish history. So that is something that creates a basis for orientation of the preparedness. You don't have too many natural disasters, in fact. We are lucky in that respect. We are not lucky that we are very close to Russia, but that's how it is. So that's a bit the reality. Then, of course, as Rasmus was well saying, that the kind of a hybrid warfare and including information, disinformation, critical infrastructure, all these things that were elegantly mentioned there, they don't kind of they are not that closely tied to geography. So those are very relevant irrespective of distance. And I think it's very to realize and understand that. But given that we really share the same values, and also like now referring to Rasmus all the time, but I think I actually very much like the kind of idea of weaponizing trust. Because this is something that we really would be very wise to work around this concept. Because this is what we are going to need in the decades to come. Because there are really, really nasty things going on globally, and there are dark forces that are very active. And Nordic area is much stronger together than individual countries on their own. But I mean, practically, we can think about different things. We can think about educating ourselves, kind of setting the benchmark. We can think about information sharing. Or even before that, I think the most important thing that I have come across nationally in Finland when it comes to preparedness is that we kind of define more or less a shared view on the threats. Because that is and must be the basis for the actual planning and anything we kind of implement in terms of measures that enhance preparedness. That can include a lot of things, but it can kind of it will greatly kind of benefit mutual work if we have that more or less defined somewhere. That may need kind of an enhanced structure, whether that happens in the context of the Nordic cooperation, Nordic Council of Ministers, or something else. But that's important. But I mean, I can think of many ways through which we can then interact. And what we have talked quite a bit with Sweden is the kind of a public-private cooperation that we have traditionally, as I was kind of describing our model. Sweden is now very keen to kind of say copy some of the, in a good way, copy the basic kind of ideas, which I think is an excellent idea, because if Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland do more on resilience and preparedness, it is directly good, but it's also directly something that benefits Finland. So it's kind of a win-win. It's very much a win-win-win situation. And then we can talk about kind of a practical arrangements if we can refer more to the physical security, like availability of material, critical material. I have been advocating an idea that we could establish common Nordic strategic stockpiles in certain sort of clearly defined areas. That could be something that could be well worked out in the future, I hope. But I think there's really quite a lot. And I mentioned something very concrete, which we are in the process of now working, is something that relates to this undersea critical infrastructure, the cables. We have not only 1, 2, but 3 or 4 incidents. Whether you can do the attribution is unclear, but anyway, we have real incidents that have happened. So one of the things that we are looking into now with, in fact, with Sweden and Estonia is the kind of a enhanced capability for repair. So it's sort of an improving the capability to actually repair the cables if and when an incident happens. In terms of shortening the response times and making sure that we have capability that can be kind of deployed within days for any kinds of cables. And this is in fact the project that we are right now in the process of working. That's going to hopefully be a consortium at least between Finland and Sweden, hopefully also involving other players.
Rasmus, I noticed in your presentation you kept saying that Denmark was sort of lacking behind, and then you referred to Finland and Sweden. And I noticed you never mentioned Iceland. So and since you did your PhD, you're a part of it and you're familiar, I sort of assume that if Denmark is lacking behind, you would maybe argue that Iceland is also lacking behind.
Nah, not really. And I'm not sure that it's. I'm not sure it's really. I can do it because I'm from Denmark. I can take the flagellant approach to this, but it's not really helpful to talk about being behind because that was also what we discussed in a similar event in Oslo on Tuesday. That we have so much to learn from each other because we have variations in approaches. Yeah, and as we also have heard today that you have so much experience with natural hazards. Here, that luckily we are spared for most of that in Denmark. So, but we have much to learn anyway. So I think that's the important thing to map. There was a really good report that came out, I think, a year and a half from the NATO EU affiliated center in Helsinki on hybrid threats. That is one of the best reports I've seen in a long time, called Building Nordic Resilience to Hybrid Threats. I think it's a short report. We should expand that, and we should. I can really recommend that one because it goes through the Nordic countries, and it's a best practice identification report. And it's short and sweet, and that's helpful. So we should do much more of that. But I just, if I may reflect on what I've heard, I've heard the concept of natural disasters mentioned several times today, and I just want to reflect on that because in disaster research, we say that there is no such thing as a natural disaster. All disasters are per definition man-made. There can be failures to manage crisis that allow hazards of either natural or man-made origin to exploit vulnerabilities and exposure of social systems. So when we talk about total defense, we talk about societal security, they are all hazard holistic approaches to robustness and resilience. So it's actually, it can be useful to leave that distinction behind. It's a kind of old-fashioned, I'm sorry to say. So let's think about robustness and resilience in a more all hazards approach. And then I'm so happy that you mentioned NATO's basic requirements for resilience, because they have been around since 2016 from the Warsaw Summit as a direct response from NATO to the annexation of Crimea, and they're not very well known. And they are increasingly important in NATO thinking. So everybody, if you're not familiar with them, read up on NATO's 7 basic requirements for resilience. We have a tendency sometimes to think of NATO as a military alliance only, but they're very focused on civil preparedness, just like NATO was in the 1950s. So it's kind of full circle reinvention of NATO's focus on civil preparedness. So they're about ability to manage instrumentalized migration, robust communication systems, and all this from a whole of society approach. And then just to finish this little reflection, there's Nordforsk is doing so much good work in this, bringing Nordic consortiums together. And there's this new call that just opened up on antagonistic threats and societal security, working together with the Baltic states, or at least some of them. I already recruited you over coffee for a work package on the cognitive domain and information warfare. And I think I noticed a month ago that Denmark was the only country not to contribute to this. So we had a little press campaign in Denmark to make sure that Denmark would also contribute to this call from Nordforsk, because this is the most important mechanism for strengthening resilience in the Nordic country, because we need research. We need this to be research-based, otherwise it will never really work.
I definitely echo that. We need more research. I just wanted to mention, as a moderator here, that we went a little bit over time, and we're zooming really fast through this. So I think we just going to have to discuss a bit here more, and we won't have time for Q&A from the audience. But everyone is going to stick around outside, so you can ask questions there later on. But Dagbjört, you had a point you wanted to raise.
Again, a very pleasant take on the whole approach on societal resilience. And I am so pleased that we are talking about the big picture here and the role of the government in ensuring the psychological resilience, as you can put it. And very important for the government to show some leadership and being a role model in a time of crisis. However, I do have to disagree with the fact that or the stance of there are no natural disasters, only man-made. I hear what you're saying, but I do think that in the Icelandic perspective, just to shed some light on the challenges that we have to face in terms of volcanic eruptions that just take place randomly everywhere in the country, and of course just earthquakes and so forth. I think that there's always going to be some level of uncertainty. But I do think that we agree on that. But again, I think that it's a very fair point to make, that being unprepared is not an excuse when it comes to natural, challenges. But I think that it's also good when you mention the importance of research and the role of the government in ensuring that the research faculties and the universities have a very powerful position in this whole matter, is that we do have a very good set of data collection programs, and my background is in data protection, and I have seen very bad stance when it comes to the trust that we have to put into our government to collect this data and put it to use into this field. And I think that Iceland has a lot to learn when it comes to using data sets in this field. And I certainly have to put that into action on the correct fields.
Yep.
And the private sector is a very, very, very important collaborator when it comes to this.
Yeah. Before we wrap this up, I wanted to ask you, Jóhanna Bryndís, a little bit about the Nordic Council of Ministers and sort of what's been going on there in terms of trying to get everyone to work together on these really important matters.
Yes. Then these important issues are being discussed in quite many angles, in quite many fields. I mean platforms in Nordic cooperation. They are being discussed by the Nordic Council of Ministers, Nordefco, the Haga Cooperation, which about civil security, also within NATO, the parliamentarians, the Nordic Council talk about, so it's like discussed in various platforms. What makes the Nordic Council of Ministers a very good platform to also discuss this is that there we have together the official Nordic cooperation between all the Nordic governments, and they have cooperation in 12 ministerial councils in various fields. There are the Nordic cooperation ministers, it's in culture, it's in education, in research, in fisheries, in justice matters, in finance matters, and all those ministerial councils meet once or twice a year, have senior officials, councils under them, which are actively working, give a gateway into all the Nordic governments on this. They have a secretariat in Copenhagen supporting them. They have a budget, going to Nordforsk, for example. Yeah. So like it's a unique opportunity for also this comprehensive security approach. So like now, when the cooperation programs for all the 12 ministerial councils, which are actually 14 programs, but that's a longer story, most of them also have something on societal resilience or preparedness or security in their cooperation programs for the next years. And that will provide funding, and that will provide focus, and there is very much political focus on this. So now the Ministerial Council on Culture will talk about cultural resilience, and it's also being discussed in terms of education and all those various fields. So I think it's very important that the Nordic Council of Ministers also participates in this work.
Yeah. So 3 takeaway messages. Number 1, we can learn a lot from each other, right? We're not lagging behind. We can learn from each other. We need more Nordic cooperation. And as an academic, I love to say we need more research, right? Very glad to hear the politicians say that as well. Sorry, we ran a bit over time, but as I said, everyone is going to stick around so you can ask questions outside. I just want to give a quick shout out to all the technical staff here for doing an amazing job, and Silja and people here at the Nordic House for organizing this event, and our speakers, panelists, and of course all you here for being such great guests and listening so nicely. So let's give us all a nice round of applause. Thank you.